Hi, thank you for clicking on my video. It's going to be a sexy one. And I'm not just saying that because I got a sassy new haircut. Thank you for noticing, by the way. Today I'll be talking about BookTok's romance and spicy book community. If this is your first time coming across this topic, I would describe the romance community on BookTok as something of a magical place, where people, mostly young women, gather to review and recommend their favorite romance and erotica books, and implicitly and sometimes even explicitly encourage and empower each other to explore their romantic and sexual fantasies through reading. Wholesome, right? Wrong. Okay, fine, maybe that was a little bit dramatic. The community is not all bad, although it's not without its occasional oddity. Like this one lady who is a little bit too comfortable telling everybody about her, what does she call it?
Because even my kitty, she don't know how to fucking act. She tired of drooling.
Sure, it's a little bizarre, but ultimately harmless. That being said, every single video I've made about the online book community so far has a sizable amount of comments placing a sizable amount of blame for the current state of the publishing industry at the feet of BookTok, specifically the romance community on BookTok. So let's talk about it. To my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are three main things that people typically criticize when it comes to the romance community on BookTok: the low quality of the writing, the high quantity of books constantly published and advertised on the platform, and the negative impact the genre has on its readers. In simpler terms, many people feel like TikTok romance books are nothing more than trashy porn with zero literary value, that take away shelf space from real literature, promote overconsumption, and give young women unrealistic and often toxic expectations of what romantic relationships should look like. That was a mouthful, but overall a pretty fair assessment. However, as the majority of you agreed earlier this week when I asked for your thoughts in a poll, there's room for a little bit more nuance here. A few weeks ago, I made a video about BookTok and overconsumption, in which I criticized the way that one book going viral on TikTok often leads to publishers immediately putting out a dozen more books with essentially the same plot to capitalize on that trend. And a number of people commented that this is particularly the case with the romance and fantasy genres. For example, one person commented that they find it hard to get recommendations for good fantasy books on TikTok because the only fantasy books that go viral are just focused on romance tropes with no interesting plot, world building, or characters. Everything revolves around what specific scenes and tropes will go viral. Still on the topic of fantasy, another person said that since TikTok became a big player in the publishing industry, they've noticed that the quality of the books has dropped shockingly. Same story, same type of characters, no plot, but a lot of smut. And I want to note that this type of comment doesn't just come from people who are generally critical of TikTok or BookTok. BookTok got me back into reading. I have noticed though, especially in romantasy, a lot of the newer books seem copy and paste. So the general feeling seems to be that the romance genre is the one that contributes to overconsumption with the creation of these copy and paste, samey books the most. However, I would like to point out that if this is true, it's probably only the case because the romance genre in general sells the most out of any other genre. Someone else, for instance, commented that they've noticed the same thing within the horror genre. And the same can be said with trends in literary fiction. Notice, for example, how over the past few years, everyone started putting out female rage narratives. That being said, of course I agree that the overconsumption critique is a valid one. I made a whole video about it. And I also agree that the quality of the writing in romance novels is not in the room with us right now. But I'm not sure that any of the women reading these books have ever claimed that they are reading anything other than silly books with a lot of sex scenes. I haven't seen any of them write essays about the cultural value of these books. So why are the people criticizing them writing essays about how spicy books are not real books and it shouldn't count towards your annual reading goal on Goodreads? I know it sounds made up, but there are actual people screaming into the void on Twitter about this. It reminds me of the whole audiobooks don't count as reading discourse, because not only is it objectively not the truth, but what difference does it make to you personally if some people choose to listen to books rather than read them? I've also noticed this new trend on TikTok where people make these "I'm not like you, I read Dostoevsky and Kafka" type videos, which I find really confusing, like...
Why can't you have both?
In her video, The Cult of BookTok, Amanda from the channel Swell Entertainment makes a point that romance is not generally perceived as a respectable genre, both because of the subject matter and the medium through which it gains its popularity, i.e. TikTok, and not the traditional, and in the eyes of many people, legitimate publishing process. And I would add that the fact that the community is mainly made up of young women, a demographic who has had its taste mocked for sport since forever, doesn't really help the respectability factor. This is not to say that there are no men on BookTok, but in the romance community particularly, where the books that go viral tend to represent heteronormative relationships the most, they're not as visible, unless they're trying to profit off of it. In her video, Amanda talks about thirst trap TikTokers who seem to have figured out that the romance community of BookTok was a potential audience for them if they could make thirst trap content around the books that are popular. But I think that this is a great example of the way in which the community seems to be caught between men who patronize them because of their choice to enjoy these books instead of high literature, and men trying to take advantage of them in this sort of bizarre misogyny sandwich. And I'm going to pause here for a second because every time I mention the misogynistic aspect of the criticism that the book community online gets, some people end up leaving me paragraphs about how men should be able to criticize women without being called misogynistic. So just to clarify, when I say a lot of the criticism is misogynistic, I'm not talking about people who engage with the community in good faith and bring forth valid criticism. I'm talking about the welfare kings of the world who cannot even discuss misogyny without typing it in the mocking alternating caps and calling me boo-boo. Do you think Welfare King calls the men he disagrees with boo-boo? Yeah, I didn't think so. Or the Ingrids of the world, who for some reason seem to believe that women can only make a valid point if they're wearing turtlenecks. She's not gonna like this video either. All this aside though, BookTok and the romance/spicy book community have real issues that need to be addressed, and which creators from within the community are actually doing a lot of work addressing. In her video, Does the Romance Genre Have a White Supremacy Problem?, Cindy from the YouTube channel With Cindy refers to the romance genre as a conduit for white supremacy. The exact term she uses is a Trojan horse. She critiques the way in which romance authors use people from opposite sides of a political ideology to create an enemies to lovers trope. And we're not talking a Republican-Democrat type of relationship, although I have my problems with that too. One of the examples that Cindy gives is a book in which a Nazi soldier falls in love with a Jewish woman. And while it is true that the dark romance subgenre aims to deal with taboo topics and kinks, a love story between two people who are part of opposing groups where one group actively oppresses the other is not an enemies to lovers story. Beyond the ever problematic she redeemed him with her magical coochie trope, or the way in which these novels place the onus on the oppressed to save and rehabilitate their oppressors. The conflict resolution in this book, in particular, sees both characters convert to Christianity, which is a pretty insane thing to do. To make denouncing Judaism a necessary condition to the happy ending of a Jewish person. Cindy's video opens with a discussion about a book by the British author Tilly Cole, which was at the center of a huge BookTok controversy earlier this year, when some BookTokers pointed out its insensitive treatment of themes of race, hate speech. Actually, nothing I say will fully describe what the book is about, so I'm just going to say it. The book is called Darkness Embraced, and it follows a love story between Adelita, the daughter of a Mexican cartel boss, and Tanner, the heir of the Texas KKK chapter. Obviously, this premise was too insane to go unnoticed, and some creators went ahead to post valid critiques of the book, but they immediately got an insane amount of backlash from fans of Cole's books. The Rolling Stone reported that people were organizing targeted attacks in which they planned to mass report the critical TikToks and try to get them removed, which is insane mob behavior. How thirsty do you have to be to get upset over people criticizing the KKK? The author herself did eventually come out and took responsibility for well, I'm not really sure what she took responsibility for. Her statement was this non-committal, I'm going to keep learning and growing notes app apology type of response. So unclear, but this type of feral attacking of anyone who disagrees or criticizes your favorite book is actually not uncommon on TikTok, and I would go as far as saying probably one of the most toxic traits of the community on this app. Another example of this mob mentality is the way that people react to Colleen Hoover criticism. I've personally never read her books and I don't intend on it, but if you want to get an idea of the type of prose that she is known for, I do recommend these videos by Casey Ayonzo. Colleen Hoover is not as active on TikTok as other romance authors. I guess after you've sold 14 million books, you can finally relax. A lot of authors are maybe too online on BookTok. Amanda explains that the reason why she thinks of BookTok as a cult is because of the power that the community holds over the publishing industry. Related to that, she describes the way in which authors, particularly YA and romance authors, can reach huge audiences by teasing book concepts. Essentially, they make these videos where they describe the topic and tropes of their books, or put together fan cam-like video montages to explain the mood of the book or what a protagonist might look like. And in this way, they start to build an audience of very invested, very passionate people for books that haven't even been written yet. And after seeing Amanda's video, I started to ask myself, if BookTok is a cult, then are viral authors the cult leaders? One of the authors who used TikTok to drum up hype for her upcoming book is Emily Rath. She wrote a book called Pucking Around, which is a hockey romance. Another best-selling book in the genre is Icebreaker. I haven't read either of them, but you can check out this video from Jack Edwards if you want a good objective review of them. The story of this book is that when it finally came out, a bunch of fans started doing something called face claiming, which is when fans of a text go and find real-life people that they cast as their favorite characters. I'm not going to get into the minutiae of what happened because I already made a video about this, and a bunch of other much larger creators have also made videos sharing their thoughts about the situation. Long story short, a very loud minority, and I just want to point out again that what I'm about to describe is not a reflection of the BookTok romance community as a whole, began making increasingly sexually explicit content about the Seattle Kraken player Alex Wenberg, whom they had arbitrarily face-claimed as one of the main characters in the book, to the point where his wife eventually came out with a statement about how uncomfortable she was with this type of content. And because the statement was met with pushback and further harassment of her husband, Alex Wenberg himself had to come out and put out a statement about how everything was making him uncomfortable and hurting his family, essentially. It's important to note at this point that the Seattle Kraken social media team had been playing into this, pandering to the BookTok community with slightly sexy videos of the players stretching and stuff like that. And they even invited somebody from the community to one of the games, and she made all sorts of content out of that. But ultimately, the people taking part in this behavior ended up not taking any accountability, not ever really apologizing for their part in the harassment. And it's really disappointing to see that the people involved learned absolutely nothing from the harm that they caused, because it is real harm. A few days ago, I received the following comment on the video that I made about the situation. I'm a hockey player, and let me tell you, the hockey romance genre bleeding into real life is absolutely real and terrifying, to be quite honest. I'm on a hockey team for my school, and there are tons of girls who go to the games, and some of them aren't even from my school or the opponent's school. This doesn't happen at other sports events besides big football games. I also see tons of girls posting things saying, "Trust me, ladies, hockey guys are the new football guys." And it's so weird to me that me and my teammates can be sexualized in this way for playing a sport. And this sport requires us to be covered head to toe in padding, so you can't even see any part of our bodies, unlike with some other sports like football, or having tight pants and stuff like that. This is kind of long, but yeah, it's just weird, and the NHL absolutely shouldn't be feeding into it. And I know we don't need testimonials from victims of harmful behavior to be able to say that it is harmful, but I wanted to include that because it seems like now the BookTok romance community has moved on from hockey and onto bikers, some of whom are underage. I'm not going to get into that because honestly, at this point, But I can direct you to this video if you want to hear more. The larger point here being, given that this is what this type of literature can lead to, is it really empowering to women? To return to Amanda's video about the cult of BookTok, she points out that there are people out there talking about how romance BookTok is bad because it hypersexualizes women and men don't like hypersexual women. Watch her video for the full story. So of course that when faced with this type of statement, a lot of women might feel the need to push back. One, because this type of statement implies that the idea of women actually enjoying sex is repelling to men. And two, because it implies that everything women do should be geared towards male approval, which is of course ridiculous and no doubt infuriating to hear to women in the romance community. I've also seen a number of people claim that reading smut can lead to porn addiction in women, a claim that is not only completely unsubstantiated as far as I could see, but porn addiction itself has been surrounded by debate for some time. As of 2021, the American Psychological Association does not qualify porn addiction as a real psychological condition, clarifying that in some cases, social, cultural, and religious customs may lead people to view their pornography habits as addictive due to shame and stigma associated with sexuality. In an article with Business Insider, Nicole Proz, who is a neuroscientist who researches sexual psychophysiology, said, "If you think you're struggling with pornography, it is more likely that you are actually struggling with a conflict of your own personal values around your sexual behaviors and not really the porn itself." She also added that people who struggle with their pornography viewing almost always have an underlying disorder, most commonly depression, that requires treatment. And because a lot of the criticism that the community gets is rooted in this desire to stifle any type of expression of female sexuality that does not exist for the benefit of men, it's not surprising to me that a lot of women equate reading smut with a sort of sexual liberation. But are these books really a conduit for sexual liberation? In the video, Toxic Roleplays Keep Romanticizing Abuse, Alice Capel argues that since dark romance books often recreate the traditional power dynamic in which the male partner is in control and the female submits, they only create an aesthetic of sexual liberation for women. And she does an impeccable job of deconstructing that statement and also offering a possible alternative plotline to these books, so do watch that as well. Personally, however, I do take slight issue with the statement that reading romance or erotica books is damaging to the female psyche. I've seen this argument more and more recently, and it reminded me of a whole slew of articles that I found in 2011 about how romance books are impacting women's ability to discern between good and bad decisions with regards to their romantic lives. The articles were all based on the same essay written by Susan Quilliam, who is a relationship expert and who argued in the essay that although there was no conclusive evidence that romance novels affect women in any way, she still felt that they probably do. This NPR article explains how the essay was then misquoted as a piece of research instead of an essay by one leading publication, which then got misquoted by another leading publication, and the half-truth kind of spread across the internet for the rest of that year. I know about this because I was in school at the time and we were reading Madame Bovary, which is how I was introduced to the so-called Madame Bovary syndrome. Madame Bovary syndrome, or bovarisme, is a term coined in 1892 by Jules de Gaultier in an essay he wrote about Gustave Flaubert's Madame Bovary. It describes an individual's dissatisfaction with their life when it falls short of the romantic experiences they read about in their favorite books, which is exactly what it sounds like. A form of unhappiness with one's life, which stems from having unrealistic expectations. Emma Bovary did cause herself and everybody around her quite a bit of misery by trying to pursue the life that she had read about in her romance novels. But the novels she read were not exactly the source of her unhappiness, nor were they the catalyst to her untimely demise. She was pulled out of education, forced to marry a man she did not love, and then made to follow him to a place where she didn't know anyone, and where she had to watch him make several bad decisions that eventually led to his professional ruin. She may be daydreaming about a life like the novels she read, but that's because she is a prisoner in a pretty bleak life. And there's no way out of this life for her because she is a woman in a heavily patriarchal society. Also, I think it's interesting that there's a couple of times in the book where other characters laugh at the silly books that she reads, but at the same time, those are the only books that she has access to by virtue of being a woman. She lives in a world where women are considered too dumb to engage with high literature, but also mocked for liking lowbrow literature. She cannot win, fortunately. In the year 2023, many more women have access to education and the opportunity to develop the critical and media literacy skills needed to engage with portrayals of toxic relationships and perceive them as such. I don't know, taking on this paternalistic attitude of, oh, let's help the poor girls, otherwise they're gonna learn bad relationship patterns from the books. A little, dare I say, misogynistic. Also, there is no conclusive proof that this is how people interact with the media they consume. Over the past few decades, there's been a lot of discourse about the impact that violence in video games has on young people, and there's still no consensus about that debate. Researchers have found an overall correlation link, but not a causality. And some researchers have even noted that aggressive children have a tendency to choose violent games as opposed to the games making them aggressive, a sort of chicken and egg situation. And the same can be said about reading. Personally, I really dislike the implication that the person reading is like an empty vessel who just takes everything that they read in without transforming it in any way. When in reality, we all bring our own tastes and takes to every text that we interact with. That's why literary criticism is such a wide field. Everybody and their mother has an opinion. Psychoanalytic critic Norman Holland, for example, believed that the interpretation of a text said more about the reader than the text itself. In his view, the reader imposed themselves and their experiences onto the text and not the other way around. Holland believes that we react to literary texts with the same psychological responses we bring to events in our daily lives. The situation that caused my defenses to emerge in my interpersonal life will cause my defenses to emerge when I read. Holland calls the pattern of our psychological conflicts and coping strategies our identity theme. He believes that in our daily lives, we project that identity theme onto every situation we encounter and thus perceive the world through the lens of our psychological experience. Analogously, when we read literature, we project our identity theme, or variations of it, onto the text. A literary interpretation may or may not reveal the meaning of the text, but to a discerning eye, it will always reveal the psychology of the reader. Now, of course, you don't have to agree with Holland. I'm not entirely sure I do myself. But I also refute this idea that women are so easily brainwashed by what they read and need to be protected from the evil, sexy books. Also, if that were the case, then we wouldn't be able to hold any woman responsible for the thirsty harassment behavior that goes on BookTok because she was just brainwashed by the book. In conclusion, sexy books good? Not really. Sexy books bad? Not really. Is the BookTok romance community annoying? A little bit, yeah. But they're not killing anybody yet. So until they do, thank you so much for watching this video. It has been a pleasure to have you here, and I will see you next time.